You won't believe what happened when a black woman was stopped by the police in her hometown. This incident not only shocked the locals, but also became a catalyst for an important fight for justice. In a small town where life flowed smoothly, an incident occurred that stirred up society and made many people think about bias and justice. The main character of this story is 32-year-old Amira Johnson, a woman known in her neighborhood as an activist and a kind-hearted person. She worked at a local art school and was the mother of 2 children. Chapter 1. Stopping. It was an ordinary evening. Amira was returning home after a long day at work when she was stopped by the police. She did not expect this. Her car was in good condition, and she herself followed all the rules of the road. However, the policeman who approached her looked wary. "Good evening, madam," he said with a cold tone. "Do you have the documents for the car?" Amira felt her heart beat faster. She handed over the documents, but the policeman continued to ask questions about where she was coming from and where she was going. His aggressive behavior and distrust were obvious. "Why are you talking to me like that? I didn't do anything." "What is it?" she exclaimed. "Do you know what a criminal looks like?" one of the policemen replied, pointing to her skin color. These words deeply hurt Amira. She never thought that she would become a victim of racial bias in her hometown. She recalled how many times she had heard stories from her parents about how they had to deal with discrimination. Now she was in their shoes. Chapter 2. Conflict. The situation was escalating. The police began searching her car without explanation. Amira felt helpless and humiliated. She tried to record what was happening on her phone, but one of the policemen noticed it and demanded to remove the device. "You have no right to do this," she shouted. "Actually, we have the right," he replied with a grin. "And if you continue to resist, we can detain you." Amira knew her rights, but fear of the police and possible consequences hampered her actions. At that moment, she felt the full weight of the historical burden that her generation carries. Chapter 3. Society's reaction. The incident quickly became known in the city. The witnesses started taking notes on their phones and posting them on social media. Soon the video went viral, and local residents began discussing what had happened. People gathered in the square near the city hall with posters and slogans in support of Amira. "We stand for justice," they chanted. This movement brought together people of different nationalities and ages. Many of them shared their stories of bias and racism. It was a moment of unity for a community that had long remained divided for various reasons. Chapter 4. Support and Activism. Amira has become a symbol of the struggle against racial bias. She received support from various organizations and activists who began organizing rallies and discussions on race relations in the city. At one of these events, Amira made a speech. "I just want my children to be able to live in a world where their skin color doesn't determine their fate." These words touched the hearts of many present. After the rally, Amira was approached by a group of young people who offered to help her organize future events. They were full of enthusiasm and desire to make a difference. Chapter 5. Legal Consequences. The situation has attracted the attention of local authorities and human rights defenders. An investigation into the actions of the police has begun. It soon became clear that the policeman had previous complaints about racism and aggressive behavior. Amira decided to file a lawsuit against the police for violating her rights. This decision was a bold step for many who were afraid to speak out against the system. "I'm not alone," she told her supporters. "We can all change this together." Chapter 6. Discussion and Changes. As a result of the incident, discussions began in the city about the need to reform the police. Citizens demanded transparency and responsibility on the part of law enforcement agencies. Local authorities have begun to consider the possibility of creating a training program for police officers on racial sensitivity and community engagement. Amira actively participated in these discussions, offering her ideas and solutions. Chapter 7. Personal Recovery. Despite the public support, Amira was experiencing personal difficulties. She has faced negative comments and threats on social media. However, she did not give up. Instead, she began working on her mental state through therapy and the support of friends. Amira realized that her struggle was not only for herself, but also for the future of her children and all those who face prejudice. She started a blog where she shared her thoughts and experiences, inspiring others to fight for their rights. Chapter 8. The Trial. The trial became an important stage in Amira's life. She had been preparing for this moment for a long time. At the hearing, she presented evidence of her case and the testimony of those who witnessed the incident. The judge listened carefully to both sides and decided on the need for an internal police investigation. Chapter 9. Public Outcry. The court's decision caused a storm of emotions in society. Many supported Amira and some opposed the changes. However, this only fueled discussions about race relations and the need for reform. Amira continued to speak at rallies, inspiring others to share their stories of bias and injustice. Chapter 10. A New Perspective on the Future. The incident changed not only Amira's life, but the whole city. People began to realize the importance of combating bias and the need to create a more just society. Amira became a community leader by initiating various programs for youth and women. She organized workshops on art and self-expression, helping people find their voice. Chapter 11. Personal Life. In the process of fighting for justice, Amira faced problems in her personal life. Her husband, who initially supported her, began to feel pressure from society and friends. Their relationship became strained, and soon they decided to divorce. It was a heavy blow for Amira, but she understood that she had to continue her struggle for the sake of her children and for the sake of the future. The divorce was not only an emotional ordeal for her, but also a time of rethinking her life. Amira decided to focus on her children and her mission to combat bias. Chapter 12. New Allies. However, along the way, Amira met new allies, other activists, and people from different walks of life who also fought for human rights. They joined a support group and began organizing events to raise awareness about racial issues. Amira met Kevin, a young lawyer who was also involved in human rights work. Their shared desire for justice brought them closer, and they soon became good friends. Chapter 13. Wide Response. Amira's story has attracted national media attention. She began giving interviews on television and radio, talking about her experiences and calling for changes in the law enforcement system across the country. Her story has inspired many people to share their feelings about racism and prejudice. Amira organized a series of webinars for young people where they could openly talk about their problems and find support from each other. Chapter 14. Educational Initiatives. Amira realized the importance of education in the fight against bias. She began working on creating a program for school children about race relations and the history of the struggle for human rights. The program included lessons about the great leaders of the civil rights movement and the importance of respecting differences between people. Amira hoped to inspire a new generation to fight for justice. Chapter 15. Personal Transformation. Every day, Amira became more confident in her abilities. She started exercising and meditating, which helped her cope with stress and keep her mind clear during difficult times. She also started keeping a diary of her thoughts and emotions, which helped her better understand herself and her goals. It became an important tool in her personal recovery after all the trials. Chapter 16. Community Support. The community continued to support Amira in all her endeavors. People came to her events, shared their stories, and became part of the movement for change. Amira organized a diversity festival in the city, which brought together people from different cultures to celebrate unity and understanding. This event has become a symbol of hope for many residents. Chapter 17. Interaction with the authorities. Amira actively worked with local authorities to implement changes in police practice. She participated in roundtables with representatives of the police and the mayor's office, where issues of racial sensitivity and responsibility of law enforcement agencies were discussed. Her persistence led to the creation of a police monitoring committee that included community representatives. Chapter 18. The Reform Program. As a result of these meetings, a police reform program was developed with an emphasis on training officers in the principles of equality and respect for differences among citizens. Amira took an active part in the development of this program together with representatives of the police and human rights organizations. Chapter 19. Education as a key factor. Amira understood the importance of education for changing the consciousness of society. She launched an initiative to hold seminars for young people about human rights and the history of the struggle for civil rights in the United States. These seminars attracted a large number of participants. Young people came with their questions and concerns about racism and discrimination. Chapter 20. Confession. Soon, Amira received an award from the local council for her achievements in the field of human rights and activism. At the award ceremony, she delivered an inspiring speech about the importance of unity and solidarity in the struggle for justice. "We must remember," she said with tears in her eyes, "that each of us has the right to be heard." Chapter 21. New Threats. However, as her popularity grew, new threats came. Amira began receiving anonymous messages threatening physical violence for her actions against the police. These threats made her think about the safety of her family. She sought help from a local human rights organization, which provided her with legal support and safety advice. Chapter 22. Escalation of the conflict. Meanwhile, the conflict between activists and the police escalated. At one of the rallies, there were clashes between protesters and law enforcement agencies. This event attracted media attention across the country. Amira realized the need for a more strategic approach to activism. Instead of just protesting against the police, she began to work on creating a dialogue between government officials and society. Chapter 23. Dialogue with the authorities. Amira organized a series of meetings with local officials to discuss issues of racial bias in the police. These meetings have become a platform for an open dialogue between activists and government officials. At one of the meetings, Amira asked the question, "How can you guarantee the safety of our children?" This issue became a starting point for discussing concrete measures to improve relations between the police and the community. Chapter 24. The Reform Program. As a result of these meetings, a police reform program was developed with an emphasis on training officers in the principles of equality and respect for differences among citizens. Amira took an active part in the development of this program together with representatives of the police and human rights organizations. Chapter 25. Education as a key factor. Amira understood the importance of education for changing the consciousness of society. She launched an initiative to hold seminars for young people about human rights and the history of the struggle for civil rights in the United States. These seminars attracted a large number of participants. Young people came with their questions and concerns about racism and discrimination. Chapter 26. Personal Trials. Despite her success in social activities, Amira faced personal challenges. Her children began to experience difficulties in school due to peer pressure due to their mother's fame. She decided to talk to them about it openly. It's important to be yourself and be proud of who you are. These conversations helped the children understand their identity and strengthen their bond with their mother. Chapter 27. Expanding Influence. Over time, Amira's influence only grew. She began receiving invitations to speak at human rights conferences across the country. Her voice has become an important element of discussions about racial justice at the national level. Amira used this platform to draw attention to the problems of her city. and the need for changes in the justice system. Chapter 28. Supporting other activists. Amira began working with other activists across the country to create a coalition of human rights organizations. They joined forces to combat systemic racism on a broader level. This coalition organized protests, educational events, and lobbied for changes in legislation at the state level. Chapter 29. Personal growth. With each new challenge, Amira felt more confident in her abilities as a leader. She began to study the basics of law to better understand the legal aspects of her work. This training opened up new horizons for her activism. Now she could not only talk about problems, but also offer concrete solutions based on legislation. Chapter 30. International recognition. Amira's story reached an international level after she spoke at the UN Human Rights Conference. Her speech on the need to combat racism provoked a strong reaction among the conference participants. Amira realized the importance of global cooperation to achieve change, and she began contacting international organizations to share her experience in fighting for human rights. Chapter 31. Influence on children. Amira tried to raise her children as active citizens capable of defending their rights. She often took them with her to human rights events, explaining to them the importance of participating in society. The children began to show interest in activism. The eldest son even wrote an essay on racial justice for a school competition. This became a great source of pride for Amira. She saw the fruits of her labor in how her children perceived the world around them. Chapter 32. Unforeseen circumstances. One day, Amira received a call from her activist friend from another city asking for help. The police there brutally dispersed a peaceful protest against racism. This event shocked Amira. She realized that the struggle for justice goes beyond her hometown. Amira decided to organize a trip for a group of activists from her city to support the protesters elsewhere. This decision has united people from different parts of the country under a single banner: the fight against oppression. Chapter 33. A trip to the protesters. The trip proved to be a success. A group of activists spent several days at the scene, helping to organize the protests peacefully. Amira addressed a crowd of thousands with a speech about unity against oppression. Of all forms, it was a moment of triumph. People shared their stories of fighting for human rights. The atmosphere was filled with hope for change. This trip has strengthened ties between various activist groups across the country.